The recent activity between the Federal Reserve and the White House has the question of Fed independence being brought up yet again. And now the questions revolve around what that relationship should look like. Is it good as it is right now, or are there tweaks to be needed? Pleasure to be joined to speak about this with David Zaring, who's a professor of legal studies and business ethics here at the Wharton School. Hi, David. Great to talk again. How are you?
Good, good. Great to be here again.
It has been certainly an interesting last few months to see this play out. As this is all kind of developed, what have been your thoughts on where the Fed stands and obviously the concern about maybe not having the independence that it has historically had?
That's right. The Fed's independence isn't on the legally strongest footing you could possibly imagine. And certainly recently, there's been an effort to give the president a lot more control over sort of oversight remote areas of the administrative state. And the question has always been, is that going to include the Fed, which people often talk about how important it is to maintain its independence. And in the last few decades, it's been able to set monetary policy really without much regard to political oversight, and that's led to low inflation for most of this period since the 1980s, with the very notable exception of what happened after the coronavirus crisis. But with that blip, the Fed has been pretty good about keeping unemployment low and inflation low. And that's what it is being charged to do. And one of the reasons it's been able to do that is because it hasn't had to worry about, what's going to happen in the next election and how should we think about that. And that is the kind of thing that happens if you're going to talk about political oversight of the Fed and its monetary policy decision making.
And historically, the Federal Reserve has done a very good job, it seems like, as an independent body, correct?
It does have a pretty good track record. Like I said, the period between 2020 and 1980 was really low inflation and pretty high growth, and that's an admirable record. The Fed has always had to deal with presidents who would like it to pursue a different monetary policy. And there were years, the years before the Great Depression and between the founding of the Fed in 1913 and the Great Depression, where the Treasury Secretary was on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. And that obviously added a political dimension to the way the Fed did monetary policy before then. And Congress amended the statute to move the Treasury Secretary off the Board of Governors and try to make it a sort of more independent bipartisan institution.
And of course, a lot of the discussion right now is whether or not the president of the United States, not necessarily this president, but a president, would have the ability to make changes in terms of the leadership of the Federal Reserve without having cause, I guess, just on basically the whim of what he would like to see from a policy perspective.
That's right. The Fed, like a lot of independent government agencies, has for cause removal protections written into the statute. Unlike a number of other agencies, the statute doesn't define what cause is. Other agencies, it's malfeasance, neglect of office, that kind of thing. And we don't know what the Fed's for cause protections exactly protect. But we do know that, with the possible exception of a case in 1951 where the President Truman told the chair of the Federal Reserve he'd lost confidence in him, the Federal Reserve chair at the time, then shortly after hearing this from the president, did resign. So was that a for cause removal? I'm not sure, but he resigned after he was told that the president didn't have confidence in him, and that's the only time where a federal member of the Board of Governors has gone in the past, and it's never really been tested as to whether they can be removed for any reason that the president wants, including the desire to have lower interest rates.
When you talk about independence and the Fed, obviously, we're talking about it in this discussion, but central banks in general, put in perspective the importance of having that independence when you think about monetary policy and trying to make sure that an economy runs as smoothly as it potentially could.
Yes. Now, here's where I should say that I'm just a country lawyer from Iowa, not an economist. And I think economists are a little more measured than they used to be about central bank independence, which they overwhelmingly think is important in general. It hasn't been established very clearly that if you get yourself an independent central bank and independent monetary policy, that makes everyone richer. It is, however, the case that people think that if there's an independent central bank that sets monetary policy, outside of political oversight, you get lower inflation. And people really hate inflation. So if inflation is what you're worried about, then what you want is an independent central bank that isn't overseen by politicians who may be worried about the next election and so want low interest rates with the idea that that'll juice growth, and the inflation that follows from juiced growth
Right.
is something they won't have to worry about because they won't be around when the sort of bill comes due for low interest rates juicing economic growth.
But from a legal perspective, if a president were to make such moves, then I guess the expectation is there would be legal challenges that would follow, probably from those individuals who were being removed, maybe potentially all the way up to the Supreme Court. I would assume.
I think that's right. It's really high profile, these efforts to either get the Fed to change its monetary policy or to change the personnel who are making those monetary policy decisions. The Fed has indicated that it believes that legally the president can't remove the chair or members of the board of governors. And so I expect that if that kind of thing happens, that you're going to see litigation. And in fact, I think we are seeing litigation. And it's likely that the courts will have to weigh in on this. The Supreme Court itself will probably have to weigh in on it if it gets to that level. And by the way, it's already said something about this issue. It said in another order that while it's comfortable with the removal of other members of federal agencies for any reason, even with their for cause protections. They think the need to have presidential political supervision over those agencies is more important than their need to be insulated from politics. But it said the Fed is different. And so the Supreme Court's already a little bit on record as to saying we think Fed independence is more important than the independence of something like the National Labor Relations Board.
And I'll finish up on this then. If the for cause provision is somewhat cloudy at times, does that need to be cleared up a little bit further as we move forward here because of seemingly what appears to be challenges being brought forward, but what we could see is challenges coming down the road?
I think that's right. And I think that if Congress really wanted to preserve Fed independence, they ought to pass a statute that explicitly makes clear what's going on. Right now, we're relying on something from 1913 that really isn't very clear as to what's covered and what isn't. Now, you never want to bet on Congress taking up legislation that would be a great idea. But that's the kind of thing that would clarify what exactly Fed independence is. And then, it could be that there's a political desire for more oversight of the Fed. Then that might lead to inflation. But if that's what Congress and the president want to do, then they could write that into the law. And that might be a good idea.
David, great to talk to you as always. Thanks very much. All the best.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. David Zaring, who's a professor of legal studies and business ethics here at the Wharton School.